Everybody, welcome either in person or whenever you see this to our quick little presentation on how to use Creative Commons to create and locate open educational resources. I'm Collie Van Nimwegen, and Janelle Yoder and I are going to kind of be switching off and on during this presentation. It's really informational and just intended to give you a quick background on intellectual property, Creative Commons, and some places that you can use to find these types of resources when you are creating OER content. So some of this may be familiar to some people, some of this might be a completely new concept to some people, so hopefully we cover a lot of things, but if not, we'll answer questions at the end too. All right, sound good? I'm going to assume that's a yes because I feel like I'm talking to
Yes.
maybe
No,
3
you're
people.
good. You're good.
Okay, so when throughout this presentation, we are going to be looking at briefly reviewing the concepts of intellectual property, copyright, fair use, Creative Commons, and the public domain, all things that I am very nerdy about. And then Janelle's going to go into understanding Creative Commons licensing options, so you understand some of the ways that you can license and have control and agency over your content. And then we are both going to go into different places that you can find OER content in different search engines and repositories for various types of media. So other texts, other instructional materials, images, video, etc. Okay. So inside the AHESE website, we also have this information in some form or another. Under the resources page, we have open ed resources, and we've also got a guide to Creative Commons. So all of this is available in some form or another, and we are always available if you've got any questions relating to intellectual property, Creative Commons, and licensing, and that sort of thing. We are always happy to help you figure out your approach for these tools. All right, let's get nerdy. So intellectual property is kind of this very large umbrella of creative works that people have made. And under this umbrella, there are copyrighted works, which authors still have the control over, and you must either get access, be granted access to use them, pay for that access, or be given access to use them legally. There's a smaller subcategory in here for fair use for different types and forms of use, and then the public domain is intellectual property that for one reason or another is no longer under copyright or has never been under copyright to begin with, and those are completely free to use. In the middle, and the time that we'll spend the space that we'll spend the most time in this presentation is the Creative Commons, which are a set of legal licenses that allow a creator to retain copyright while still giving some access and rights for people to use less restrictively than they might for a fully copyrighted work. And if that sounded very quick, don't worry, we are going into full details and definitions. This is just a visual to give you an idea of how to kind of envision this section and how you might figure out where a copyright versus a public domain work might sit under the umbrella of intellectual property. Okay, so intellectual property, an actual definition. Intellectual property refers to creations of the mind, such as inventions, literary artistic works, designs, symbols, names, and images used in commerce. We're not really going to go into trademark and that type of intellectual property in this presentation because it doesn't really apply to the type of things that we are doing with OER content. IP is often divided into two main categories. So the first one is the one that we don't usually talk about in this context, but it comes up very frequently in other contexts: industrial property, patents, designs, trademarks, geographical indications, and that sort of thing. The place that we do have a lot of conversations is copyright and related rights, for literary, artistic, and scientific works, including performances, broadcasts, any sort of recorded media that has a creative aspect and is created by a human. Important distinction there. AI cannot be copyrighted. Things created by animals cannot be copyrighted. It must be human made. Can be copyrighted as long as it demonstrates a degree of creativity. So copyright, very simple, is the right to copy. It is not very simple, but the idea and the definition behind it is very simple. It is the right to copy. Almost all intellectual property is protected by copyright, aside from processes, facts, and ideas that are not set down in a physical form or recorded in some way. So a recipe cannot be copyrighted. The context around a recipe could be, so that's one of the reasons why you see on the when you look up any recipe on Google and there's a long blog post in front of it, that's one reason, not the only reason, but that's one reason why that's theirs, so that they can apply a copyright to that content. Their text can and their blog post can be copyrighted, but the recipe itself is an instructional process and cannot be. Same thing with like math equations, for example. Copyright is automatic at this time. It used to not be, so that we do have a period of time where copyright was something that you had to specifically declare, register, and renew, which means that some things are now in the public domain because no one renewed them at a time period when they needed to. But as of 1975, I believe, copyright is automatic. You create something, and as long as it's set down in a recorded medium, then you have a copyright on it. It lasts for a long time. The life of the author plus 70 years is the current frame of copyright. So once an author produces a work, it is theirs up through the end of their life and then another 70 years after their death. Works made for hire, so for a company or corporation, it will be 95 years from publication or 120 years from the creation of the work, whichever is soonest. So this is really an extension of what it used to be, and you can blame Walt Disney's corporation for this. A few others, but Walt Disney especially for a very long time was suing to extend the copyright on Mickey Mouse and a lot of their earlier creations so that they wouldn't lose that copyright. As of last year, Steamboat Willie, the earliest form of Mickey Mouse, is now in the public domain. But they really wanted to prevent that for as long as possible. And there's other trademark protections on Mickey Mouse, so it doesn't quite matter in the same way, but they wanted to protect it in all the ways they could. All right, once a copyright expires, the work enters the public domain. In general, if you are looking at an image or a video or anything online, I know it's very easy to click copy paste, but you should always assume that a work is copyrighted and seek the appropriate permissions in order to use it, just in case. With a few caveats, especially because we are in an educational context here, which means we have some rights in terms of fair use. Fair
Kelly,
use is, yes.
I'm sorry. I know that you and I agreed we were going to hold questions, but Lynn has a
Ooh.
question, and I was wondering if it'd be okay if we entertain that now.
I see Lynn's asked if geographical indications include the Gulf of Mexico.
Oh, it's a different question. That
Oh, it's
was,
a
I have
different question. Okay, what's the other one?
The other one is, and maybe this is going to come up in fair use, but I was going to have the students in my assignment watch the movie Mr. Holland's Opus. We might have talked about that last time. And is that something that I can have them do? Is that maybe that falls under fair use?
It can. Okay, this is going to sound like a very strange distinction, but are your students online or in person?
Online.
Okay. Online is a little trickier. But you should still be able to. I'm going to go and grab All right, I'm going to make a note of finding more information on this. So online use is a little trickier. There are performance rights granted under fair use for in-person playing of a movie for a one-time gathering. Online can be a little bit harder. There's something called the Teach Act, which allows you some wiggle room in terms of how you do it with an online class. And I think that yours would fall under that because you're using it with one class for a specific semester, but it can be a little bit, it's a little bit esoteric and strange. The Teach Act is kind of this weird wiggle room area. So I'm going to find you proper documentation on that so I don't tell you the wrong thing.
Okay.
But I think that you should be fine for your specific use. But that's a
Okay.
very good question because I know you were planning on using Mr. Holland's opus, and performance rights becomes a little of an awkward area for teaching online.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
May I ask a question as well?
sure, go for it.
So one of the comments you made was that you cannot license the recipe itself.
Mm-hmm.
But then you said because it's an instructional, did you say activity or?
It is a set of instructions and it
Okay.
doesn't have, I know it seems weird for recipes because we would think of cooking as a creative activity, but it isn't considered creative in terms of the writing down of that set of instructions.
So here's my question then. We're developing lesson assignments that are basically a recipe for a lesson. So does that impact how we're able to use copyright assignment,
Ooh.
like copyright attribution? Because I'm just wondering about that.
I think that because we are adding in other elements, yes, we can still license it under Creative Commons, which is a form of
Okay.
copyright.
Okay.
Because it's not just the straightforward, we have the reflective aspects and we have some other aspects to it that
We
adds
have some
more
context
creativity.
around it, right?
Yes, and that would be
Yes.
the same as, for example, the recipe. Um,
Mhm.
is when you've got that additional context around it, that creative context can be copyrighted. It's the step-by-step process that can't be.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, very good question.
Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. In terms of geographical indications, does that include the Gulf of Mexico? Yeah, that one's tricky. There's some interesting things with copyright and maps where old map makers would prove that they had copyrighted a map based on creating paper towns, which are fake towns on the map. But in terms of whatever's going on with this administration and copyright and the Gulf of Mexico, find an actual legal scholar for that one. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. I didn't really mean to get us off track, but I just couldn't help myself when I saw that
Yeah.
geographical.
It definitely made me laugh, but yeah. Who knows on that one? I'd be fascinated to find out, especially because it's international waters. So copyright when you get into international things is even more complicated. Okay, fair use. So, fair use is a legal doctrine that promotes freedom of expression by allowing unlicensed copyright protected works in certain circumstances. So, there are four factors that you need to consider as a whole when you are applying for individual uses of a copyrighted work. One is the purpose and character of the use. So whether the use is commercial or is nonprofit educational purposes. For example, I used to work for a commercial educational company. We did not have any rights to fair use because we were a for-profit educational company. Everything that we used had to be in the public domain, had to be royalty-free stock, or had to be licensed in a way where we were obeying those licenses, or we had to pay for it. For nonprofit educational purposes, such as in the community colleges, you have a lot more leeway in what you can use and how much you can use and still justify a fair use. One factor here is that no, you can say this is a fair use of this material. However, a judge is the only one who can actually lay down and declare this is a fair use. So you can talk until your face is blue about whether or not your use is fair, but only a judge is actually going to have that final say. Which leads to some really funky things where whoever has the most money to take somebody to court frequently wins in terms of copyright. But so purpose and character of the use, the nature of the copyrighted work, if it is something that is, for example, unpublished and is something that, I don't know, you found somebody's diary and you decided to publish it, but they were the ones who wrote it, that would be frowned upon significantly. Whereas if it's something that is out there, you are just taking a small portion of it, and then it's going to be a little bit looser standards. The nature of the copyrighted work really factors into it. If it's for educational purposes or if it's for satire, that also will factor into it as well. So, for example, if you're taking a speech and you are using it to either educate about the speaker or the subject, or you're taking a speech and you're using it for satire purposes or commentary, then you're going to have a fairly good justification for fair use. The amount and substantiality of the portion used. So if usually we look at about 10% of a work would be considered roughly fair use. If you're using, say, 50% of a book and saying, here, you can read this, I've scanned in half of this book and I want to use it as my textbook, but I'm only using half of the book, that would probably not be a fair use case. But if you're saying, I've scanned in this chapter of a book as a reading, that you could probably justify as a fair use case in an educational purpose, for nonprofit educational purposes. And then the effect of the use upon the potential market for or value of the copyrighted work. So are you taking money away from the original creator by providing this art, by providing this for free or by using it? And I see a question from Robin just came up in the chat about what about a scientific journal article? Scientific journal articles, okay, we've got 3 different things here. So if you are accessing a scientific journal article through our databases and you're providing it to your students, that means that the library has paid for access to that journal article. If you're accessing it online through, let's say, PubMed, and it is an open access article, then usually the college or university that funded the research or is paying the researchers is going to have paid for it to be open source and open access, or it was published in an open access journal like PLOS. If you are accessing it on something like Sci-Hub, where a whole bunch of journals get scanned and put up there that is not fair use. They're essentially stolen. The morality of that is, we're not going into morality here. Legally, that's illegal. Morality-wise, especially with the way that the journal market and the academic market is set up, is a little bit hairier. But legally, something like Sci-Hub is a piracy site for science, if that makes sense. If you pay for it and then share it for educational purposes, you should be fine for fair use. You're sharing it in a nonprofit educational context. Sure thing. The other thing is something like ResearchGate. A researcher is allowed to share their articles for free on a platform called such as ResearchGate. So if they're the one publishing the article for free, even if it is in a pay to access journal, you can still use it there because they still retain their copyright. They also, but they've given up some publishing rights ish. It's a weird market, but
Kelly, would that be, it seems to me that would skirt a little bit close to taking away a monetary gain of the publisher, that, you know, so I'm going to publish my article, which is being published in the journal, whatever, medicine. Aren't I kind of infringing on their potential to make money from that?
yes. So that actually brings up a really handy point of this is why you have to consider all four factors. Because just looking at what the effect is on of the use on the potential market isn't going to be the only factor that's considered in any context. So for example, if you are taking it and using it to and going to sell it yourself, then that would not be considered fair use. But if you're using it for nonprofit educational purposes, it's a educational document, and you're not giving them the whole journal, you're just giving them one article out of the journal, then that would be considered more of a fair use argument than if you were saying, oh, here's this entire journal that I've photocopied and given to you. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yeah, that makes
Okay.
sense. You're not free to take other articles. You're only free to take yours.
Yes.
But, okay. All right. I don't want to belabor it, but that was very helpful. Thank you, Kelly.
Sure thing.
Holly, a question about that then too. So I've used Perplexity sometimes for as a generative AI platform, and
Yeah.
it produces, it includes references, resources. And so are those articles, what's my ability to use any of the articles that it includes in its response to me?
Oh, those are fine. If you can, so this comes back to if it's something that you can access online. So Perplexity is giving you a link to an article. That means that someone, so let's say that you're linked out to PLOS, which the Public Library of Science, I think is the journal title. It's a really massive scholarly journal that publishes only open source. So everything in that journal is available to be used in an open source context. So if you are clicking on a link and it's taking you out to a journal article that's an open access journal, you are totally allowed to use that. You can send other students to use it. It is open access. It's completely fair for you to use that. It wouldn't even fall necessarily under fair use. It's something that's provided openly to be used online. If it's something where you click on it and let's say it's taking you to JAMA, and it's a medical journal that is pay for, and you can only see the abstract, and you can't access that full article online, then you could go in and look in the databases and see if we have a license to use it. But that would be your essential paywall for whether or not that is copyrighted content that you are not allowed to use in that context. But just the
Very
link
helpful,
out,
thanks.
that's fine. Same thing actually, because this comes up quite a bit and it's kind of an esoteric thing. Same thing with embedding a YouTube video into your Canvas course. That is not even a copyright question because judges have considered that to be a link out to the content. It's not a copy, it's linking back to that original platform where the content is hosted. So if you embed a YouTube video into your Canvas course, that's not considered copyright, a copyright question, because students can click on the little YouTube icon and it will take them out to the original place where that video was hosted. So you're totally okay to do that too. You just can't take it away so other people can't use it, and you can't make a copy of it that does not go back to the original version. Okay, so Creative Commons. I'm not going to cover this in too much detail because Janelle's going to talk about it in a moment, and I'm realizing that I have already talked for quite a while. But Creative Commons are a set of licenses that are designed to help copyright holders license their work for free use, but you have to abide by the requirements of that license if you want to use it for free. But they can still retain their copyright and dictate how they are allowing their content to be used. So in a bit, Janelle's going to go over that in more detail so that you can get an idea of how to use some of these licenses for your own work and what they mean when you see them out on the internet and in the wild. And then finally, the public domain. So the public domain, which is, I love the public domain, this consists of works that for a variety of reasons do not have a copyright. So anyone can use them for any purpose. You do not have to seek permission of a rights holder. You do not have to attribute them. You can change them however you want. It's where a lot of really creative things happen due to the fact that we have the public domain. Back to Walt Disney. Disney, when he was getting started in making movies, would only use things like fairy tales because they were in the public domain and he did not have to get rights permissions from some other creator in order to use it. So there's a lot of creativity that comes out of us having a public domain, and it becomes one of my favorite things. So works, as of this year, works that are published before 1929 are in the public domain. Every year, for the last several years, we had a long stint where nothing was getting released into the public domain, also due to the Disney Corporation. But now works published before 1929 are in the public domain. In next year, January 1st, Public Domain Day, it'll be 1930, 1931, 1932. So every year we get new things into the public domain. Currently, Winnie the Pooh just recently came into the public domain, as well as Steamboat Willie and Sherlock Holmes. So works published between 1924 and 1977 without a copyright notice. So this goes back to, there was a period of time where you had to file copyright, you had to stamp it saying that it was copyrighted, and you had to renew that copyright notice. There's actually a ton of movies that either never put a copyright on them or they forgot to renew the copyright when studios got bought or closed or switched. And you can actually go out, there's a whole website where you can go and find open source movies, and you'll also see them on a lot of different streaming platforms because anyone can put them on their streaming platforms. One of my favorite movies, Charade with Audrey Hepburn and Cary Grant, is in the public domain because they forgot to renew it for their copyright. So it's a really fantastic way to go and discover a bunch of old movies. And works created by the federal government and some states, but specifically works created by the federal government are in the public domain. All images, all those fantastic images from NASA that are coming out of the James Webb Space Telescope and all of those galaxies and all of the any sort of thing that was created by the National Park Service, like our picture on the front of this slideshow, all of those are in the public domain. You can do whatever you wish with them. Works whose authors have expressly waived their rights and released into the public domain. Quite a few creators say, hey, take it, use it, do whatever you want with it. I'm waiving my rights. In terms of, you can release it into the public domain, you can license it as CC0, which means there's nothing that we have to do in order to use those works. So there's quite a few people who release things. Kenneth MacLeod is the first person who comes to mind. If you've heard any music that you hear just over and over and over again in the backgrounds of different YouTube and TikTok and Instagram videos, like Spinning Monkeys is a really famous track. those ones, he writes royalty-free music, releases it, anyone can use it as they wish. So that can be a really useful way to also get a lot of different content. Oh yes, I'm glad somebody else loves Charade. Such a fun movie. Okay, so this is just another way of considering this. Copyrighted works are going to be the most restrictive. Fair use has quite a few restrictions based on how you are using it. Creative Commons is relatively open as long as you follow the rules laid out by the creator, and the public domain is completely open. You can do whatever you like with those works. So that is my slightly longer rundown than I intended, but I'm glad we had some really great questions in the midst of it. Run through of intellectual property. Any final questions before we go on to the next section? Yes, Larry.
I have one. So as our faculty are creating these lesson assignments, are they, and maybe Janelle will address this, but are they, is there an expectation of applying one or more of the Creative Commons licensing because the grant has been funded by the Arizona Department of Health Services? Or is it completely up to the faculty to decide?
It's more because of the expectation that we are publishing this as an OER book. So the content in it will need to be licensed for open use. So
Okay.
in that case, it's a Creative Commons question of choosing things that can be licensed in the Creative Commons space. So if you
I
decide
see.
in your assignment that one thing that students might do is watch a video, then that can be linked. But if you were, say, having them, if you were going to save that video, or in terms of Lynn might end up having a little bit of the Mr. Holland's Opus thing might. I'm going to look further into that because I hadn't really considered that. I know we talked about it, Lynn, but I hadn't really considered that in this context. We might need a few workarounds for how that might work. So, but that's more why you would need to consider what level of intellectual property. If you're pulling in other works, other images, and other things, then they need to be something that we can point to and link, or that if we're including them as an actual element, then they should be in the Creative Commons.
That's really helpful, Kelly, because I guess I had in my head that we were talking primarily about how the faculty might assign their Creative Commons. But what you're explaining is that as we build these lessons, we need to be sensitive to the kind of materials, the kind of links, and so forth. So thank you, that
Yeah,
was great.
absolutely. And then there's also the agency part of it, of how you want to release your own work. And this can also go beyond what we're talking about in this grant. I also just think that it's useful to know kind of the boundaries of intellectual property in general. But for the context of what we're talking about here, there's our individual agency of how we want to use the things and license the things that we create, and how we are aware of the requests and desires of the people that we are using their creations as well.
Yes, thank
All
you.
right. Janelle, take it away. I can handle I'll scroll for you though.
Perfect, thank you. So yeah, we're going to dive into what some of these Creative Commons licenses are. I will give the well, first off, I am not as nerdy about this as Callie is. So Callie, if I say something wrong, please jump in and correct it so that we don't continue misinformation. But when you look at the Creative Commons licenses, what I like about this little infographic is it shows you kind of which ones are the most free to use and which ones are a little more challenging when we're sharing something. So if you are, you may need to, if you're creating some new content, we're going to be taking care of that as we license the book itself. But if there's something you want to have specifically attributed to you or something like that, you can do that. But also, if you're pulling information and it has a license on it, that's where we need to be careful as well. So I'm going to leave that there. I found other visuals that switch some of this stuff here in the middle is a little bit different. Oh, I'm trying to show you with my mouse. Doesn't work. Some of the stuff that says non-derivs and no derivs and non-commercial are flipped around in some other visuals and other content in other places, but there's not too much to worry about. And I also, it was interesting, I wanted to make sure that I attributed this particular image, and I had to go hunt it down because this has been widely used and not everybody has attributed it. So I think I found the original as well and attributed it. But let's go through some of the specific Creative Commons licenses. So if you go to the next one, the most simple, besides the putting it into public domain, which Callie said is CC0, is the CC BY. And that means that anybody else can reuse this, they can distribute it, they can remix it, adapt it, or build upon the material in any medium or format. So this is the most loose of permission. You just want to make sure that you give attribution to the creator, and it can even be used for commercial use. So anybody can use it. Let's go to the next one. And in this one is similar. It's got Creative Commons BY, but the SA stands for share as. That means that you need to share the, or share, I'm not sure if that's exactly right, but adaptations have to be shared under the same terms, or maybe SA stands for same. What is it, Callie?
Share alike.
Share alike, that's what it is. So, yeah, so with this, whatever you cannot put this in a more restrictive than how it came to you, is I think the best way to think about it.
I'll also add that you must share it. So for example, if you are taking something if you're taking a Creative Commons item that's licensed under share alike and you change it in some way, then you also need to share it. So under the same license, so that you're not taking something, changing it, and then not sharing it back out there. You'll see this in Wikimedia and Wikipedia a lot in terms of taking a graphic and translating it into other languages so that people in other parts of the world can also use that graphic in their own language. So someone will take it, they'll change all the language to say from English to French to Spanish to Russian, and then they'll repost it so under the same license so that everyone else can use it under that license as well.
So they need to show the original and then the changed one?
They need to create it, and then usually under, if they're putting it on, say, Wikimedia Commons or Creative Commons or wherever they're putting it, there's going to be a way for them to link back to the original too.
Okay. Oh, good. Yeah. All right, let's go to the next one. So those first two are probably the easiest ones to work with. When we get further down the spectrum here, we get into some things called non-derivatives. So that's what the ND stands for, non-derivatives. And it wasn't that I didn't delete these things. I specifically left them on the slide to show that with this, you can reuse and distribute it, but you cannot remix it. You cannot adapt it. You cannot build upon material in any format. So it has to just stay the same. It's almost, I made it in my mind, I think, okay, it's a PDF. I can't change it. And you can still use it for commercial use, but you cannot make any changes. Let's go to the next one. And then this is where some people think one or the other of these is more restrictive, but non-commercial means you can use it for any of these things, for reusing, distributing, remixing, adapting, but you cannot use it for commercial uses. So here in the community colleges, that's not usually an issue for us. Still need to make sure you're giving attribution to the creator, but can't make money from it. And then similarly, this is adds the SA share alike, and you can continue to use it, can't use it for commercial, but you must use it under the same terms as it was used. And then we get into the much more restrictive areas of, now we've added non-commercial and non-derivative. So that just adds another level of complication to that. And then the last one is, oh, that was the last one. That is the most restrictive one. Yeah. Yes, that was our most restrictive one. Which we kind of want to avoid those, I think, because if you want to go back now, Callie, to the slide with the color spectrum on it, there we go. Just so you can see those again, how it's so much easier just to stick to those first top two is my personal preference, just because it makes it a lot easier when, especially as we're going to be compiling everything together. I think that will help our things. Now, how do you figure out if you've created something and you want to give it a license, or you've taken some things and you want to put it into a license? Creative Commons has this actual little license chooser. I want to call it a little machine. And that's the link for it there. But Callie, if you just click on it, it will open up into, we're going to just go through that because okay. So what we're going to do is look at what the licenses look for, and it just kind of takes you through these questions. So do you know which license you need? Well, we're going to say no. And next. And then do you want attribution? Let's just show, Callie, if you don't want let's do the no, so you can see what that CC0 looks like. So you're still kind of marking it and making it really obvious how people can use it, that they can use it. All right, but let's go with yes also. And so if you want attribution, you're going to get a CC by. And you'll also see different levels of CC. They've updated their licenses at different times. They've reworded some things. And so this says 4.0. I've seen others like 2.0, 3.0. There have been different ones. And I was just reading about that before we came on and don't know enough yet to explain more on that. But but just noticing that I don't think it matters if it's an older number.
It does not. Once you release something into Creative Commons, you cannot take that license back. So regardless, if somebody has released something into Creative Commons and then later it goes super duper viral and they're like, wow, I really could have made money off of that 10 years down the line. You could try to do certain things, but legally, once you release something into Creative Commons, you can't then claw it back and say, actually, no, I want to reinstate full copyright protections over this, and people can no longer use it for free. So once it's in Creative Commons, it's going to stay there.
Okay. So let's go to the next one. Right. Do you want to allow others to use your work commercially? And you can say yes or no. I'm going to say no, let's not. And if you scroll up, Callie, then you can see, so we can see that there's the licenses. The next, go ahead and say next. Do we want to allow others to remix, adapt, or build? We'll say yes to that. And let's look at what that looks like. And then it just explains it right there in a little paragraph too, how that works. And then do we want to allow others to share adaptations of your work? Oh, under any terms? Let's say no, let's not worry about that.
So then that will be that share alike. Yes.
And that's where I think it looks different in different versions of, I feel like that's one of the things that looked a little different. Go to the next. Okay, and then here you just confirm that you have the authority to do this, that you've read and understand the terms, and that you understand that it's not revocable. As Callie was just explaining, we can't go back and be like, nope, I'm taking that back. Okay. And then it even takes you through like some creation things so that you can officially get this saved and out there to other people. Yeah, you see she's.
Yeah, I don't have a link.
I was going to have some stuff ready and then I realized you're presenting, so that's okay.
And it will give you this lovely rich text, HTML, XMP, and also a full license and an abbreviated license that you can use. So
Yeah. So I don't think we're asking our folks to do much with that, but we just wanted to make you aware of that, what the whole process is. In case there is something that you are doing that you do want to add your own copyright to, if you're creating like an infographic or you're creating something to go with that into our compilation, then we have that there.
yep.
All right. And I see we have a question about this. So
Yes.
Oh,
So
go ahead, Lynn.
thank you. Is what you just went through, including that share alike, because you're going to be putting this out there, I would imagine we should choose certain things when we license our assignment. So I would just want to make sure that I do it the way it needs to be done for the book that you're putting together.
Right. Do we have any further
Especially
on
because it's
that?
irrevocable.
I would have to check with Debbie. I wish, I don't know if Stephanie, you know, if we've got something in terms of an overall license that CC license that we're going to be using. My,
We're not. We're just obviously we want it the most open license, right? Because we want to share this widely. We're going to copy everything and put it into a press book that we can share out with everyone.
mhm.
So the least, right, the least restrictive is what we want.
Yeah, I would see no problem, however, with, for example, commercial use would be something where I would not see any issue with you choosing to not license for commercial use and saying like CC by ND, saying that because this is going into an open source book, there's no reason to say, oh yeah, somebody else can use this for commercial purposes if you don't want to. When we hit derivative works, then I would say probably allow derivative works because we are doing it in an open source book that really encourages derivative works already and allowing people to adapt, remix, and build upon the work. So that would be my inclination, would be to sharing requirements. Yes. Yes.
Or you can go back
So
to the infographic too.
yeah, so CC by and C would probably be the one that I would recommend based on what the book is, the intention of the book going forward. Does that make sense?
Thanks. Good question, Lynn. Okay, so back on there we have, okay, so Callie, I think you were going to cover the next part about
Yes.
where to find some of these things.
Yeah, so I'm not going to go into too much detail for these just because we've only got a few minutes left and this goes kind of into the weeds of where to find things, but I wanted to give you guys a few resources if you want to find images and other media either in an educational way or just to make your materials a little bit brighter and more engaging. Flickr is a photography platform that has a wide range of CC images. If you come onto Flickr and just do a basic search for, I always search dogs, you'll have, after you do a search, come on, you'll have advanced filters over here. And you can see under content, oh, no, not under content, under license, it will give you all Creative Commons, commercial use modifications, and then even US government works if you want something that is fully, absolutely public domain. Flickr partners with the US government to provide federal images inside Flickr. So that's a fantastic resource. Another one, Wikimedia Commons is a really great, especially for science. Wikimedia Commons has tons and tons of science images and audio, video, 3D models. It's a little bit of a messy, weird dig because it's part of Wikipedia, and if you've been on Wikipedia, you know how open source works and everybody's organizing things a little bit differently. But they do quite well with their due diligence to make sure things are licensed appropriately, and they'll have licenses on everything, and you can limit those as well. Pixabay is fantastic royalty-free stock images and audio. They aren't technically Creative Commons. They've got their own open content license that they use, but it behaves the same way as public domain. It would be nice, they request that as a courtesy you provide an attribution to the person who created it, but you do not technically have to. And then finally, CC Search Portal. This one, oh, I didn't link it apparently. Go back. This one is, all right, I can't click on it apparently. Heck. This one is something that Creative Commons created so that you could search different forms of Creative Commons media. I find it a little bit clunky to use, but it has a lot of good options for looking up images, text, and audio and video as well. There's technically ways you can find creative content on YouTube. I was going to show you how to do that using the dogs search again, but man, YouTube is just drowning in AI dog things now. So we're going to skip that bit just because, woo, that's one. But YouTube does have a lot of things that are licensed under Creative Commons, and like Flickr, it will be, after you search, there's going to be a set of filters that you can use to narrow down your content. There's tons of other ones out there, but I'm going to let Janelle take over for looking up different educational resources as well.
Okay, so if you are looking for some OER to add into your, like as you're creating your lesson, you can find things that are out there. And I had some samples, but I'm not on my account. But I'll just mention that you can go to OER Commons, and these are all linked when you get this, when this slide presentation is added to the website, these things are all linked, and I think it's already on there. But you can search for specific aspects. A lot of it is full lessons or full books, but you can see how other people are using them there. Press books, I just put that on there because that's something we're using. We're creating a press book. Integrating an entire other press book probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But I do want, Callie, can you just go to the Mason OER MetaFinder site? Yes. I really wanted to highlight all the things that you can search with this. So this is a MetaFinder, and it searches, there we go. If you can see on the right, all the things it's searching all at once. So it's it's got all kinds, it's got OER sources, and it's got other public domain sources like Library of Congress, Project Gutenberg, New York Public Library. Those are some that have a lot of digitized materials that you can access through that. And then there's lots of search filters and things you can add to that as well. But I know for me, I get down a rabbit hole when I do go into these things. So I don't want to start one.
These are all linked on the AHESE website as well.
Yeah.
So if you go into the OER resources page, these are all going to be linked, as well as quite a few others.
Right. And just again, as you're going in, one of the filters you can add to it is to stick with the looser restrictions. So stick with things that are looser restrictions so that we have less problems when we add them into our press book.
Okay. So how we can help in this. So this is meant to be one of those ways that we are instructing you on the concepts of open source educational materials. So giving importance and background of OER and frameworks, etc., is what we're doing today. But we can also talk with you one-on-one about the ways that you want to incorporate OER or the ways that you want to license your materials to make sure, if you're uncertain about any of this process, doing this on a one-by-one, what specifically works for your project, is going to help us go more in depth than this really broad overview. I already know I'm going to be doing some research to make sure that Lynn is okay with using Mr. Holland's Opus for this, for example. So come and talk to us. And then, as always, if you've got something that is a larger research assignment that you want to add in or incorporate, and you would like a librarian to help with that, developing that research aspect of it, we are always happy to do that as well. Happy to do that as well? Well, happy to help you do that as well. Let's say that. So, and finally, questions. If you've got any questions, we've got 5 minutes to answer them, and otherwise you can contact us using our emails, and then we've also got the request form if you'd like to have a consultation as well.